Peace and blessings, Life Warrior. Dharma Shakti here. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Monday message. If this is your first time watching any of my videos, I am a yoga teacher, a spiritualist, and a mother of two. All right, let's dive into today's message. Normally, I give you a quote and we unpack this quote and we talk about it, or I talk about it, you listen. But today I thought that we would unpack a concept. One concept that has been going around the last couple of years. People have been talking about it. And I feel like some people are getting it and some people are missing the mark. And some people are just like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. And you know, the tricky thing is, well, you know, just because we don't know what something means doesn't mean we're not doing it. Like, I didn't know what passive aggressive was. I didn't really understand that concept for a while, but I was still being passive aggressive, even though I didn't have a term for it. I was still being that way. And once I learned what passive aggressive was, I could start to recognize it in like relationships and things going on. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm being passive aggressive, right? I had to come into a concept that could help me recognize a pattern that I was displaying in my life that wasn't healthy for me. So let's unpack spiritual bypassing. Let's talk about it just briefly. I'm gonna do my best here, okay? Spiritual bypassing, I think, is, I don't know how long this term has been around. I can say in the last at least 5 years, this concept has become more mainstream and more people are talking about it and using this term. A lot of us still are not sure what it is. So this is my effort to kind of help you understand what it is so you aren't doing it. So spiritual bypassing, let's just unpack that, right? To bypass something, spiritually bypassing, it could mean that we are just totally bypassing the spirit aspect of ourselves. We're doing anything in our power to just not connect to our spirit because that's just not our jam. That's not what we want to do. We have a lot of trauma. We have a lot of armor that we built up, and just being in touch with our spirit is too much. And so we're just going to do anything and everything to just bypass that whole spirit side of self. Right? We'll do other things to feel connected to ourselves that are temporary and fleeting. Like, we'll get really intoxicated because now we feel a bunch of stuff, and now we feel like we're alive, and now we have courage, and now we have, like we're feeling, but what we're feeling is a temporary fleeting experience. And what we're really looking for is to feel alive, to feel courage, to really feel our bones, like to really feel what's in our bones, to feel our emotions, to feel that stuff in life. We really want to feel that, like really feel it in life. But it takes courage to live that way. It takes courage to live that way. And so we bypass the whole having to have courage to like feel alive in our bodies by, eating right and exercising and doing our daily routines and getting out of nature and doing all the things that we know we need to do that make us feel alive in our bodies. We skip all that and we just pour some alcohol in there because that makes us feel alive. And that happens fast. It's instantaneous. It does a trick. So we get to the feeling we want, but it's a temporary feeling. And it's a feeling that comes from outside sources. It doesn't have longevity to it. And in fact, it's one of those tricky things where ultimately it starts as a source of pleasure, but becomes a source of pain. So that's one type of spiritual bypassing. What I'd really like to focus on is the more trickier spiritual bypassing. This is the one that I see more often, which is, let me again just say spiritual bypassing to me is when we are bypassing, when we're trying to shortcut or go around or just avoid, to bypass the whole thing, right? To just avoid it all together. Our spiritual growth and our spiritual evolution. To me, that's what spiritual bypassing is. When we do the things to avoid, when we do the things to shortcut, to hack, we do things basically to avoid doing the work of evolving our spirit. So here is how I typically have been relating to spiritual bypassing and seeing it happen in my real-time world. Is when we explain away our behavior or our choices, when we explain away our behavior or our choices, and we use spiritual intellect, right? Spiritual knowledge, spiritual words, spiritual phrases, right? We're using knowledge that we have to act like we have some spiritual evolution going on. Let me break that down for you in case that didn't make sense. Instead of actually, you've all heard me say this, right? Transformation requires application. Transformation requires application. So in order to spiritually evolve, we have to take the things we're learning, the things that we're reading, the things that we're inspired by, the lessons from the ancient wisdom texts. We have to take all that stuff and actually apply it and not just talk about it. And we think that because we're talking about it, because we have the spiritual quote or the spiritual phrase, or we're wearing the spiritual adornment and attire, that now we're spiritual. And we've just bypassed all of our spiritual evolution that has to come when we come in contact with that spiritual knowledge. We cannot bypass our evolution, our spiritual evolution. We can't bypass that part and just be spiritual. We have to actually apply those things, those catchy little quotes that we like to put on our bumper stickers, right? And it's really easy to just explain away like, well, I did that because the book says this. And so it's spiritual because it came from a spiritual book. So I'm spiritually evolved. I hope you're following what I'm saying. We have to apply the knowledge and the wisdom that we get from the books to ourselves in our day-to-day life in a way where it forces us to evolve and to change. We can't just use fancy quotes, and we can't just throw out spiritual phrases and quote Bible verses or Yoga Sutra verses or whatever sacred text that you study. Just because you know the verse or you know the phrase or you know the quote or you know the concept, just because you've read a book on it or you've read 50 books on it, doesn't mean that you have applied that to your life to the degree that you have spiritually evolved. So when we just use this knowledge, these truths, these concepts to explain away, or we're just saying the stuff, it doesn't equate to the fact that we have spiritually evolved. So in our minds, we have somehow tricked ourselves to thinking that we're spiritually evolved because we read a book. Reading the book may be a necessary step, but have you applied what you read in that book enough times to be like, yeah, I've been through that one. I had to work through that one. I had to really just chip away at my ego. When I read that book, man, it really impacted me. I started applying the things in my life, and it really it chipped away at my ego, and I feel like I'm able to step more into my spiritual self. Or do we just throw the phrases out, and because we know the sentences, we know the quotes and the terms and the words, and we say the words, but our attitude is still the same self, that's just spiritually bypassing. We're not really doing the work. To me, spiritual bypassing means you're not doing the work. You're not doing the inner personal work with the information that you're coming into contact with. So some people are just not doing the work and they're just bypassing it all together because they have not had, just some people choose to go down the other route and just not be spiritual. They just don't want to even connect with their spirit. They want to feel alive. They want to feel their emotions. They want to feel courageous. And so they do things that will temporarily give them that fix, but they don't find their aliveness and their emotions and their courage in the depth of their spirit. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end is those of us who think we're spiritual because we read a bunch of books, we've taken a couple of workshops, we watched Eckhart Tolle, and we spout off his wonderful quotes and phrases, but we haven't fucking applied them. We haven't practiced them. We just showed up 2 minutes ago and we think we're evolved, right? And so understanding, like, when we use spiritual language to explain our behavior away, that's typically spiritually bypassing. When we bypass doing the work that evolves our spirit and we act like just because we've read the book, we're good, we're evolved, we're more spiritually mature than somebody else because we have some book knowledge, that's different than embodying the knowledge and having a deep sense of knowing about yourself. Okay, I hope that made sense. I really hope that made sense. And that you can just, don't be calling anybody out now. This is what we always do, right? This is how, one way that we spiritually bypass is we get information like this and we start pointing at the finger at everybody else like, oh, that person's spiritually bypassing. Oh, that person, they just spiritually bypassed. You too yourself are spiritually bypassing. You are looking out at everybody else and where they need to fix themselves instead of working on your own spiritual evolution. Spiritually bypassing is when we, just because we have book knowledge, we think that we are evolved. Having the book knowledge is a great first step, and I think it's necessary for a lot of us to start there. But we then have to apply it. Transformation requires application. You have to apply it. If you are applying that stuff courageously and you're showing up authentically and with vulnerability to those moments, then you, my friend, are most likely not bypassing. Now, the trick is our ego will really dress up our stories and be like, yeah, you're on your shit. You are really honest with yourself. You know yourself. And I really ask you to just be really reflective with yourself and ask yourself the deep questions. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I react that way? What part of me doesn't like this and why? When you start to ask those deep questions and you take accountability for yourself and your spiritual evolution, you are on the path. But when you explain things away, or your responses or rebuttals or a bunch of, short quotes and phrases that you remembered from the books that you've read, and you're just spouting those things out, right? We call that talking the talk. You got to walk the walk. Okay? If you're talking the talk, cool that you have the language and you have the words and you have the vernacular, you have the vocabulary. Like, there's some part of you that's into it because you got the language, but you got to walk the walk. So when you're not walking the walk, right, and you're just talking the talk, this, my friends, is spiritually bypassing. Just because you read it in a book and it resonated with you and you underlined it, you highlighted it, you dog-eared the page, you go back to it, just because doesn't mean that you've actually applied that in your life and you have begun your spiritual evolution. When we spiritually bypass, it's like we kind of take all that goody information in the books and we're like, okay, that's some good spiritual knowledge. I'm just going to store it up here. but we don't actually apply it in our day-to-day life and how we show up. And we're not using that knowledge to change the way we show up. And we just feel good because we read the books. And we feel good because we have the spiritual words to use. We feel good because we know what namaste means. We feel good because, it's not enough just to read the book and feel good when you read the book. Just because you read Untethered Soul doesn't mean you are a liberated soul, which is the aim of his book. I can read that book as many times as I want, but if I don't apply any of it, I could spout that off to everybody else and I'll just be spiritually bypassing my own spiritual growth, my own spiritual evolution, my own spiritual transformation. I have to apply it. So at its essence, spiritually bypassing is when we don't apply the spiritual information that we spout to believe in. When we don't apply it, but we say it, we use the language in our defense or in a way to prove something or in a way to take a stance in something. You have to apply it. Transformation requires application. It's not enough to just read it in a book and be able to regurgitate it. You got to read it in a book and then digest it and then live it. You don't have to live it perfectly. You just got to try. You just got to try. And so when we fool ourselves into thinking that we're justified because we can use some spiritual phrase to explain it away instead of just being honest with I did that thing. I said that thing. Or I didn't say a thing and I didn't do a thing. We just try to explain it away instead of doing the deep self-reflection. We try to explain it away with the spiritual word salads instead of doing the deep reflection. We just try to act like, well, I know what that is, but yet we're not actually living like we know what that is. There's a difference between having book knowledge and having knowing. You can have book knowledge. You can read a book and be able to, repeat it back to others and say these really great, smart, wonderful, powerful, potent phrases that you've read in books. But to have a deep knowing of it within your body because you've embodied that concept in a way where it's that's not how you live your life. You have a knowing of that thing because you've experienced it, you lived it. That's different than just slapping that spiritual sticker over the surface. It's I have book knowledge, so I'm spiritual. It's when you apply the thing, and then because you've applied, it's transformed you in a way that's given you perspective to where you have a deep knowing of a deeper understanding of things, that we can say that we are not bypassing our spiritual evolution. So I hope that you have found this helpful and that you apply this to yourself. You don't go around and point the finger at everybody else because that would just be more spiritual bypassing. Aha, I know what spiritual bypassing is, and you're doing it, and you're doing it, and you're doing it. That's still spiritually bypassing. Taking spiritual knowledge to point out everybody else's faults and where everyone else is falling short and not taking any accountability for yourself and your own evolution, not applying any of it to yourself. That's just more spiritual bypassing. And you, my friend, I know you're watching my Monday messages because you want to evolve, you want to transform, you want to grow, you really want to show up as your best, most amazing, authentic self. And that requires that you don't bypass your own spiritual evolution or even just your own human evolution, right? Don't bypass your evolution just because you read a couple of books and you think you know now. Transformation requires application. So make sure you are applying things. Are you applying the things that you're saying? It's so much easier to dish out the medicine to everybody else and point out that they're sick than to take your own medicine because you have the courage to recognize, well, I'm also not well. So my friends, resist the urge to look out at all the other people who are spiritually bypassing. You may observe like, oh, that's interesting, they're doing it. But I really want you to apply this to yourself. Am I doing this? Am I reading books and like being all hoity-toity and regurgitating what I read in those books to other people because they need to fix themselves, but I haven't really applied it to myself? Be honest with yourself. Ask yourself the deep questions. Be willing to at least be vulnerable with yourself so that you're not spiritually bypassing, because you deserve to grow and evolve and to step into this really amazing, magnificent being that you are. As you apply these things, you will transform, right? Transformation requires application. So no, if I apply them, transformation is going to happen, but I have to apply them. So please really think about the wonderful, beautiful knowledge that you are consuming in your life and ask yourself, how much of it have I applied? Or have I just yielded it, or not yielded, wielded it as a weapon against others? Have I just used all that awesome knowledge to just like weaponize it against others, to be like, you're not being this way, you're not being spiritual, you're not. Because I know the right phrase, but I haven't applied it enough in my own life to actually have lived it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I feel like I'm getting redundant, and I hope that you found this video helpful. You got to do the work. You got to do the work. So my friends, do the work. You deserve to do the work. You're worth the effort. I'm going to sign off here. I hope you have a beautiful, amazing week. And I'm wearing my special sweater today. Let me show you. I just wanted to give you this message. Remember to honor the struggle this week. Honor the struggle. It's okay. It's okay if you're like, ooh, I did that thing. I was passive aggressive. Ooh, I think I spiritually bypassed that moment. I think that's what I did. I think I was just all up in my ego and spouting out spiritual phrases, and it made me feel real justified. But I totally bypassed the moment to grow. Don't miss those moments, my friends. Lean in. Have the courage to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to be real and honest with yourself, because your growth is so worth it. And the life you desire to live exists on the other side of that vulnerability, and that courage, and that honesty with yourself. Being an empowered, authentic individual requires that you lean into the difficult work of discovering yourself, right? It's just part of it. There's no bypassing it. There's no going around it. All right, my friends, I hope you have a great week. From my heart to yours, so much love from me to you, from my heart to yours. I hope you have a fabulous week. I'll see you all next time. Peace and blessings.